You're not a mother. You're just a body that still happens to breathe, and I'll soon remove you from my life." Alyssa said that right to my face, her smile thin as a razor blade. I stood there suffocating inside my own son's living room. But only a moment later, everything shifted. I found a folder in her drawer that I was never meant to see, a forged power of attorney, a video of Jordan standing beside her while she withdrew money from my account, and a venomous email. "When Helena loses capacity, I'll take everything." And in that exact moment, the strange woman from that night, Thea, stepped out of the shadows and said, "I know how to make Alyssa kneel." If it were you, would you let a family tyrant crush you or stand up and rip off their mask? Comment your thoughts and hit subscribe to see what comes next. The crimes go far deeper than this. I am Helena Brooks, 59 years old, a dark-skinned woman who spent most of her life inside hospitals where I learned to hold a patient's hand tight in their most terrified moments. I thought I had grown used to other people's pain, thought I was strong enough to face any wound life could carve. But no shift, no emergency case ever prepared me for the moment my daughter-in-law looked me straight in the face and tore apart the one thing I cherished most, family. I once believed I had lived decently, worked hard, never asked for much. When my husband died young, I worked 2 jobs, one early in the morning at a community clinic, another late in the day in a rehabilitation ward. I raised Jordan with rough, tired hands and naps stolen on break room chairs. I always believed that above all else, Jordan was the one person who would never turn against me. I clung to that belief the way someone clings to a life jacket in cold water. I was wrong in the most bitter way. That afternoon sunlight streamed into Jordan's living room, so bright it felt hostile, as if it wanted to expose me, while a cold and visible weight gathered around my chest. Alyssa stood in front of me, eyes sharp as metal. I thought she would say something ordinary or at least civil, but her lips curled into a smile only those who have known contempt could recognize. Then she spoke the sentence that froze my heart in place. "My family comes first. You are last. Always the last." I heard each word drop like a stone, each one a cold blade slicing across my chest. No one prepares you for the moment when someone in your own house treats you as an obstacle, a disposable object. If anyone else had said it, I might have brushed it off. But this was my daughter-in-law, the woman I once believed Jordan chose for her kindness. I thought she would love this family the way I loved it. I thought too much. What shattered me wasn't Alyssa's voice, but Jordan's silence. My son stood behind his wife, hands in his pockets, eyes shifting like a child caught doing something wrong but unwilling to own it. I turned toward him. In that moment, I didn't need him to defend me. I only needed him to say one sentence, any sentence, as long as it didn't abandon me. But Jordan looked at Alyssa first, then at me. His voice was small, scratched, as if each word was reluctant, yet still strong enough to knock the ground out from under me. "Alyssa's right, Mom." I felt my face burn, not from a slap, but from blood, from humiliation, from betrayal delivered by the child I raised. All sound around me vanished. No car outside, no hum of the air conditioner, not even my own breathing. Only Jordan's words echoing again and again, as if someone was carving them into my skull. There is no word strong enough to describe how a mother feels when she realizes she has been erased from the very life she built. I stood there, unsure if I still belonged in that house or in their world at all. Each breath dragged a new tear through my chest. I stared at Jordan for a long time, searching for anything familiar on his face, searching for the little boy who once held my hand at the park, the child who buried his feverish head into my shoulder, the teenager who said, "Mom, you're home," to me. But the man in front of me was no longer the Jordan I knew. His eyes held no guilt, no hesitation, no pity. Only an empty distance, like a decision made long before I arrived. I was just a person being informed, not someone being heard. I stepped back instinctively, but the floor that once felt solid now seemed to crack beneath me. I wanted to ask him so many things, but my throat locked. Why didn't Jordan say anything? Why did he let Alyssa push me to the bottom? What had I done to betray him? Or had a mother's love never mattered after all? No one answered me. That moment was brief, only seconds, but I knew I had just lost something I would never get back. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I no longer felt like I was standing in a family's living room, but in an invisible courtroom where I had already been judged without a trial. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't beg. I only felt one truth rising sharply inside me the moment Alyssa said those words, and Jordan nodded. I had crossed a boundary. Not the boundary between love and hate, but between the person I used to be and the person I would be forced to become. I understood then that I would never be the same again. I left Jordan's house in silence, stepping down the front steps with legs that felt numb. Alyssa's words still clung to me like poisonous dust, but at this moment, what stunned me more was the memory of everything I had sacrificed. Sacrifices I once believed would hold the family together, but now I realized they were just stones I stacked myself to bury my own life under them. I returned to my old apartment, the place I once considered temporary, never thinking it would become a hiding place for someone slowly being erased by her own family. The space felt cramped, the dim yellow light making me feel as if I had stepped into a different story, one that may have begun long ago without me noticing. I remembered the day I signed the papers to sell the house I had lived in for 28 years. That house held Jordan's childhood laughter, the footsteps of my late husband on the backyard grass, and all the years I tried to keep us afloat. When Jordan and Alyssa said they needed a large sum to buy a new home, I didn't think twice. I blame myself now for that ease. I sold the only home I had, received a check for $170,000, then handed almost all of it to them. I kept only enough to live and moved into this small, worn apartment. When I stared at the damped walls, I told myself I was doing the right thing, that Jordan would appreciate my sacrifice. But now I see how wrong I was. The days in this apartment made me feel myself aging faster. There was no child's laughter to fill the empty spaces, no familiar footsteps from my husband, only the slow ticking of a clock that seemed to count down to something I could not predict. One evening, I tried to check my bank account to see how much was left for the month. When I opened the app, the screen asked me to log in again. I tried a second time, then a third, but the same cold message appeared. I felt annoyed, but thought it might be a system error. The next morning, I went to the bank. The young teller looked at the screen, then up at me with an uneasy expression. She spoke softly, as if afraid I might collapse. "Your account has been locked at the request of the authorized representative." I stood still, trying to understand the sentence I had just heard. I asked again, "What authorization? I never signed anything." She looked at the manager. After a few minutes of checking, the manager returned and placed a printed document in front of me. "This is the account lock request with the signature of the designated representative." I looked at the paper. My name was on the account holder line, but below it was a signature that did not belong to me. I didn't know when I sat down in the chair, only that my hands were so cold I had to clasp them together to make sure I could still feel them. I asked question after question, but they gave only one clear answer. The account access was temporarily held by the person named in the authorization document. I walked out of the bank with a storm in my mind, my thoughts spinning as I imagined the worst possibility that someone had used my name for something I had never consented to. The next day, I returned to the bank and requested a transaction history. The teller scrolled through the data, then froze her eyes fixed on the screen as if something was deeply wrong. Her voice lowered. There have been many withdrawals recently, 14 times in total. I felt my throat tighten. I asked how much, and she said nearly $20,000. I nearly collapsed into the chair. The numbers were like knife strokes, each withdrawal a fresh cut. I stared at the long list at the bottom of the page, my hands shaking so hard the words blurred. I searched my memory desperately, wondering if I had ever given someone my bank card, signed something when I was tired, or allowed anyone to use my identity for a transaction. But the only answer was no. I had never given that authority to anyone, which made the fear spread silently inside me. I stepped outside the bank, the sunlight hitting my eyes but failing to bring clarity. Everything suddenly felt distant, as though I was watching the world through a fogged pane of glass, unsure what was real and what wasn't. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment. The yellow light spread across the table, illuminating the transaction statement still open. Each withdrawal looked like the trail of an invisible hand rummaging through my life, opening my drawers, checking my bags, holding my keys. I felt the fear moving deeper into my body. It was the unsettling sense that someone was living just behind me unseen. I closed my eyes trying to find a reasonable explanation, but the more I thought, the more fear took root. One question echoed slowly, like a small needle piercing deeper and deeper, making me tremble. If it wasn't me, then who was holding the keys to my life? I arrived at Jordan's house on time as invited. On the way there, I tried to reassure myself that maybe Alyssa wanted to make peace, that perhaps I had been thinking more negatively than necessary. But the moment the door opened, the atmosphere inside the living room struck me like an invisible wall. No cake, no ribbons, no lively conversation. Only Alyssa sitting upright at the dining table, Jordan standing behind her with averted eyes, and a coldness spreading through the house I once helped them build. The white lights made everything harsher, as if this place had been prepared for an interrogation, not a family dinner. I set my bag on the chair, trying to understand what awaited me. The smell of food lingered in the kitchen, but carried no warmth. Jordan looked at me, then quickly turned away, his hand resting on the back of a chair, as if steadying himself for the role Alyssa was about to assign. I realized this dinner was not simple, and Alyssa never did anything without purpose. Their silence pressed the air down until I had to take a deep breath to stay composed. A strange intuition rose, warning that I would not leave this evening unscathed. Alyssa went straight to the point by sliding a piece of paper toward me. Her voice rang clear and steady, like a prosecutor reading charges to the accused. No calling more than once a week, she read, her gaze fixed on me to ensure I heard every word. I didn't have time to react before she continued, no unannounced visits, a sentence pushing me further away from my son's life. I glanced at Jordan, hoping for some objection, but his expression was resigned, as if my exclusion from the family was reasonable. Alyssa still wasn't finished. No giving gifts or food unless specifically asked, she continued, each word striking the table like a hammer. The kitchen felt like a courtroom now, and Alyssa the cold judge who had already decided my sentence. Jordan stood beside her without protest, studying the paper like a contract he didn't need to fully understand. When Alyssa read the last line, her voice sliced across my skin. No arguing. Then she pushed the pen toward me. Sign it, so everything stays peaceful. I stared at the paper, at the rules written in large letters, like a set of restrictions for a stranger. My chest tightened, as if someone had drained the air from the room. I tried to make sense of the moment, to find a reasonable explanation, but there wasn't none. This wasn't a gentle reminder. It was a redefinition of my place, a position Alyssa intended to nail me into, like an obstacle that needed to be contained. I looked at Jordan, hoping he would speak, hoping he would say Alyssa had gone too far, that this was hurting his mother. But Jordan spoke instead, his voice soft yet firm. Mom, don't make things harder for Alyssa. Just one sentence, yet I heard it like the sound of a door locking behind me, severing the path I once believed was still open. Jordan didn't look at me. He sounded as though I were a burden he wanted to resolve quickly, as if these rules were reasonable measures for someone like me. I felt my throat tighten, my hand still resting on the paper Alyssa wanted me to sign. I didn't touch the pen. I only looked at it, startled, as if staring at a rope slowly tightening around my neck. I remembered every moment I rushed over to babysit their children, every pot of soup I brought after Alyssa gave birth, every time I emptied my savings to help Jordan. Now everything was reduced to 4 cold lines, defining the limits of where I was allowed to exist. The kitchen grew so quiet, I could hear each tick of the clock. Every tick scraped at my dignity. Alyssa folded her arms, her expression stern and expectant. Jordan looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. I understood that if I signed, this would not end here. I would be trapping myself in the role of a woman controlled and minimized, pushed to the sideline in her own family. But if I refused, I knew they would paint me as the troublemaker, the uncooperative mother who created chaos. I stood up, the chair sliding softly behind me. Both of them looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I didn't say a word. I didn't return the paper. I picked up my bag and walked toward the door, feeling as though I was stepping onto thin ice. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from something deeper, something rising inside me like embers catching flame. I opened the door, stepped out, and closed it behind me. The street was dim, but the night air sharpened my senses. I walked without looking back, yet inside me, something was roaring to life, burning through the last remnants of the woman they thought they could silence. I left the house in silence, but inside me, a fire had begun to rise. I returned to my apartment after the evening at Jordan's house in a numb state. There was no anger and no sadness, only an emptiness that made me feel as if I had lost the most essential part of myself. The small room became too quiet. The dim yellow light falling across the old wooden table made me feel as if I were sinking into a bottomless darkness. Every shallow breath tightened my chest, where humiliation and pain twisted into a single weight, heavy as stone. I sat there for a long time, staring into the space before me and wondering what had pushed my life into such a shadow turn. I leaned back in the chair, hoping for some sense of safety, yet the room seemed to shrink around me, pressing on my shoulders. Alyssa's words churned in my mind, mixing with Jordan's distant eyes. I felt severed from the very thing I once believed would never abandon me. Neither of them thought about how I felt. Neither tried to keep me inside the circle I had built with a lifetime of sacrifice. That realization made me smaller in my own family than I had ever imagined possible. I pushed my hands against the table to stand, but my legs trembled from exhaustion in both body and spirit. I walked to the window, watching the blurred glow of streetlights through the cloudy glass. I did not want to brighten the room, did not want anyone to see me like this. I needed a sliver of quiet to gather the pieces breaking inside me. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and rubbed the edge of my sleeve like someone searching for proof they still existed. I had just turned back toward the table when a knock sounded on the door. The noise made me freeze as if struck by a jolt of electricity. No one knew I was here. Jordan would not come. Alyssa certainly wouldn't. Even my neighbors never visited at this hour. The second knock came steady and calm, as if the person outside knew I was listening. Part of me wanted to ignore it because I was too worn out, yet the lingering silence made my anxiety rise. I walked slowly to the door, my hand resting on the knob, while an unsettling instinct warned me that what waited outside was far from simple. When the door opened slightly, I saw a woman standing under the hallway light. She had a slender figure, her hair tied back neatly and eyes sharp like the line cut by steel. That gaze made me tense at once, as if she could see through me, as if she already understood what I was drowning in. She did not smile. She did not pretend to be friendly. She only studied me for a long moment before speaking. "I'm Thea Mercer, and I've come to warn you." I stood frozen in the doorway, everything in my mind twisted into confusion. I had never met this woman, never heard her name mentioned by Jordan or Alyssa, yet the way she spoke made it clear her presence was not an accident. I asked her name again, my voice rough as though I had swallowed smoke. Thea didn't enter, nor did she step back. She watched me with a calmness so unnerving, it felt as though she was preparing to unravel something I was not ready to face. I opened the door wider and invited her in without thinking. Perhaps because I was too desperate, or because instinct whispered that whatever she came to say would shake the very path my life was heading toward. Thea stepped inside and stood in the center of the small room, as if familiar with suffocating spaces like this. She scanned the room briefly, then turned back to me. "Alyssa doesn't just hate you, Thea," said her voice cold and clear. "She's preparing to destroy your life." I felt the words seize my entire body. I leaned against the edge of the table to keep myself upright. A tightness rose into my throat, making it impossible to speak. I tried to ask, tried to form Alyssa's name, but my question dissolved into the fear spreading through me. Thea tilted her head, watching my reaction as if assessing how much I could endure. She continued, her tone steady as though stating an undeniable fact. "If you think what Alyssa said tonight was cruel, that was only the surface. She's doing far more, and you need to know before it's too late." The room tilted slightly around me. The pain of the past 2 days rose to a deeper, more dangerous level. I looked at Thea, searching for explanation in her sharp eyes. She held my gaze for a few seconds, then stepped closer, lowering her voice as though preparing to reveal something terrifying. And I had no idea what I was about to face. Thea stood in my small apartment with a calmness that felt unnatural, as if she had already prepared herself for what I was about to face. Every sense in me felt stretched thin, like someone standing on the edge of a cliff waiting for the final push. The air inside the room thickened, no longer just the heaviness of my isolation, but the tension of a truth waiting to be revealed. Thea opened her bag, pulled out a brown folder, and set it on the table like a stone dropped onto wood. She slid out a sheet of paper and turned it toward me so I could see clearly. The lamp caught the surface, making the signature at the bottom glow sharply. "You signed a full power of attorney," Thea said, her voice steady, as if she had spoken these words to others many times before. "This is your signature." I stepped back, my hand covering my mouth to stifle a sound. I stared at the curled ink strokes of my name, yet it didn't belong to me. It wasn't the signature I had written for decades. It wasn't the handwriting of someone who knew every curve of the H, every deliberate stroke of the B. I never, I said, and then a scream tore out of me before I could stop it. I never. My voice rang through the room, bounced off the walls, and fell to the floor like a plea no one would answer. It felt like someone had punched me in the stomach, knocking the air out of my lungs. The forged signature lay in front of me like a blade driven straight into the trust I once gave my family. My hand trembled as I touched the corner of the page, feeling as though I were touching a physical piece of betrayal, shaped and sharpened by someone I had once welcomed into my home. Thea didn't pull back the document. She let me face it until I was forced to understand that everything I thought was terrible before this moment had only been the threshold of what was coming. After several seconds that felt like an hour, she opened her bag again. This time, she pulled out a tablet. "You need to see this," she said, and opened a video file. The screen lit up, showing the inside of the bank I used to visit. The security footage was so clear that denial was impossible. A woman in a dark blouse stood at the counter. Alyssa. Beside her, slightly hunched, was Jordan, my son. The child I had devoted my life to, sacrificed for, trusted without hesitation. I saw him hand over my bank card, saw Alyssa sign, saw both of them lean in and examine the stacks of cash as if they were collecting something they had earned. My body weakened. I collapsed into the chair as if my legs could no longer bear me. "Jordan, you did this to your mother." The question tore out of my throat, heavy as stone, burning like a deep wound. Whether I spoke it out loud or not didn't matter. Jordan in the video never turned around. He looked at Alyssa with an expression of trust that should have belonged to me. My hands shook, not just from shock, but from a grief so raw, it felt like something inside me was splitting open. No moment in my life had ever made me feel so abandoned and betrayed. Jordan participated, not through reluctance, but through willingness. Clear, deliberate, intentional. Thea turned off the video, leaving the black screen reflecting my pale face. "You've been targeted for a long time," she said, her voice slow, each word cold as steel. This wasn't a spontaneous decision, and it wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan. I lifted my eyes to her. There was no pity in her expression, only warning. The warning of someone who had watched this happen to others, perhaps lived through it herself, and knew exactly how deeply it could destroy a person. It felt as though the floor beneath me was opening, pulling me into a darkness filled with truths I hadn't yet heard. I wondered what else Alyssa and Jordan had hidden from me, what other layers of wrongdoing I had yet to see. Thea still stood there, her hand resting on the unopened portion of the folder, her gaze fixed on me, as if she were preparing to reveal something larger, something I had not gathered the strength to hear. Thea had not yet told me the most horrifying part. Thea opened the final section of the folder, and the moment the document appeared under the light, it felt as if the air around me froze. The temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. I saw my name printed at the top of the page, cold and rigid, like it had been carved into metal. Petition to declare Helena Brooks incapacitated. Thea read slowly, each word, a knock on the lid of an invisible coffin, waiting for me to step inside. I leaned closer, my hand trembling as I looked at the lines written by Alyssa. The reason she provided shows signs of confusion, unable to live independently. It felt like someone had placed a stone on my chest. Never had I imagined the woman who married my son would write such words, each one cutting deeper than the last. I pictured Alyssa sitting at her desk, calmly composing every sentence, crafting a perfect narrative, where I became a mentally failing burden. I raised my head toward Thea. She stayed silent for a few seconds, giving me time to swallow the bitterness creeping down my throat. Then she spoke, pointing directly at the fear clawing inside me. "If this petition is approved, do you know what happens?" Her voice carried a sharpness like steel. I pressed my lips together, yet the answer had already taken shape in my mind. Thea laid several documents before me. "You lose your financial rights," she said. "You lose your autonomy," she continued. "You lose even your own name." My breath caught. Losing my name? A person could live a lifetime and still at the end be stripped of identity, treated as something without value. Thea sat down and fixed her gaze on me, her eyes cold and unwavering. "Alyssa wants to put you in a public nursing facility. One overcrowded, understaffed, neglected. A place where people are forgotten until there's nothing left to lose." Her tone dropped. "That way, it's easier for her to take whatever remains of your assets." I felt myself fold inward, suffocated by the truth. Alyssa didn't just want my money, didn't just want to reduce my presence. She wanted me gone. A disappearance, quiet, tidy, convenient. A shadow pushed into a corner to fade away. I leaned back in my chair, my chest burning, my ears buzzing. I pictured myself in some unfamiliar nursing home room, called by the wrong name, handed pills I didn't recognize, viewed as a burden by a system already stretched thin. I imagined Alyssa signing the forms to send me away, her expression calm, unaffected. "Why?" I asked, my voice rasping, not from weakness, but from disbelief that such cruelty could be borne so easily. Silence stretched a moment before Thea answered. "Alyssa wants Jordan's path completely cleared. You stand in the way." Each word was a needle piercing the last remnants of trust I had left. "The weaker you are," Thea said, "the stronger she becomes. The quieter you are, the easier it is for her to erase you." I placed my hand on the table, searching for something to steady myself. My pulse thudded in my ears, every beat urging me to understand Alyssa's plan was not selfishness, but calculation. A scheme crafted with time, precision, and absolute ruthlessness. The room seemed to shrink. I looked at the petition Thea pushed toward me. Alyssa's signature sat at the bottom, neat and sharp without a trace of doubt, as if she had been waiting for this moment. A question rose inside me. Why did Alyssa want me gone? To build the perfect life she always spoke of? To clear the path she believed Jordan deserved? Or simply because my existence irritated her? I bowed my head, a breath slipping out that I could not hold back. The stone in my chest grew heavier. But before I could sink further into despair, Thea's voice cut through, her tone lowering, as if preparing to reveal something far greater. "I haven't told you the explosive part yet." Thea sat down across from me, her eyes no longer carrying the cold sharpness they had when exposing Alyssa's documents, but something heavier. I sensed there was something she had held back for a long time, a secret that weighed on the air the moment she considered speaking it. She placed both hands on the folder, inhaling deeply, like someone preparing to open a door that led straight into a familiar, painful darkness. "I've been waiting for this day," Thea said slowly. Then she looked directly at me. "You are not the first person Alyssa destroyed." The words fell between us like a blade. I stayed silent for a few seconds, letting the meaning fully sink in. There was something in Thea's tone that told me this wasn't simply a warning. It was a confession. Thea lowered her gaze to the table, her voice brushing through memories that had never healed. 3 years ago, Alyssa worked at my company, she said. Back then, I believed she was bright, quick, ambitious. I heard bitterness threaded through every word. Thea continued, I thought if I gave her a chance, she'd go far. I was wrong. She opened her phone and swiped to a picture. It showed an empty office, desks dismantled, light pooling over a space that looked abandoned after a war. This was where I used to work, Thea said, until Alyssa decided I was in her way. I held my breath, feeling her story unlock a darker layer of Alyssa's cruelty that I had not fully seen before. Thea explained how Alyssa devised a plan to embezzle $40,000 from the company's project fund. When the theft was uncovered, Alyssa shifted the blame entirely onto Thea using a sequence of perfectly arranged evidence. Every trail pointed to Thea. Alyssa remained clean, the innocent bystander. Alyssa remained clean, the innocent bystander. I lost my job, Thea said, her voice dropping. And when I lost my job, I lost my home. I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw something shimmering behind her eyes, not steel, but a wound. My husband, she continued, couldn't handle the pressure after I was accused of embezzlement. He left. I lost everything in a single month. The room seemed to grow still. What I had learned about Alyssa earlier felt like the surface of an ocean, but Thea's story revealed the depth underneath, a darkness far more consuming. Thea met my gaze, and a faint scar-like smile crossed her lips. Alyssa never allows anyone to stand in her way. Do you really think you're the first person she wants to erase? I swallowed hard, not from fear, but from a mix of anger and horror tightening inside my chest. Alyssa was no longer the woman who disliked her mother-in-law. She was someone driven by a hunger for control, willing to destroy anyone who obstructed her path. Thea placed her hand gently over mine. The touch startled me only because something passed through it, something both soft and powerful, an unspoken vow. She said, "This time, I will be the one who stops her, for you." In that moment, between two women wounded by the same person at different points in time, a silent alliance was born. We didn't need vows or detailed plans. We understood each other through shared pain, through losses only we could fully grasp. I lifted my eyes toward Thea, gratitude and fire rising together in my chest. "Why help me?" I asked, though I had begun to guess the answer. Thea looked at her intertwined fingers, then up at me. "Because you are who I was 3 years ago," she said, "and I refuse to let history repeat itself." Outside the window, the wind struck the frame, a soft, hollow sound echoing through the room, as if the world itself were warning us of the storm brewing ahead. I knew confronting Alyssa wasn't just a battle for freedom or dignity. It was a war against a woman who would destroy anything to get what she wanted. A brief spark in Thea's eyes made me wonder what else she had seen, what other horrors she knew about Alyssa. It felt like Thea's story did not end with losing her assets or her marriage. She understood Alyssa in a way no ordinary witness would. I stood, inhaled deeply, sensing a battlefield rising in front of me that I had never imagined I would have to face. When I looked at Thea again, her eyes no longer carried sorrow, only readiness, a readiness that bordered on something icy. I was preparing to fight, but I had no idea how brutal the battle ahead would become. The next morning, I woke with the feeling that I had stepped out of a dream made of ashes. But when I saw the folder Thea left on the table, I knew this wasn't a dream. It was a battlefield. And for the first time in 30 years, I didn't step back. I put on my coat, gathered the documents, and left the apartment with steadier steps than I believed myself capable of. I was no longer the woman sitting in a kitchen, enduring her daughter-in-law's ridicule. I was rising. At the legal office, I signed the revocation of the power of attorney with a decisiveness I had never felt before. Each stroke felt like cutting through the ropes that had tied me for months. When the bank officer confirmed that my account was officially closed, I exhaled deeply, as though extinguishing a fire creeping toward my door. I filed the legal complaint for fraud and forgery. The clerk looked at me carefully, perhaps sensing the mix of pain and resolve in my eyes. I walked out of the building, feeling the ground beneath my feet more solid than ever. I realized my hands were no longer shaking. I had lost too much to fear anything else. And that clarity forced me to face the bitter truth Alyssa and Jordan never believed I had the strength to fight back. They assumed I would retreat, obey, disappear, exactly the way they intended. But now, the very despair they created had awakened me. I was no longer the fragile mother in their version of the story. That afternoon, the phone rang. I looked at the screen. Alyssa. A sharp intuition made me answer, though I knew nothing good would come from it. And I was right. Alyssa's voice exploded through the speaker, sharp and jagged like shattered glass. If you go against me, you'll die alone in that little hole of yours. I heard every word hiss out between her teeth, as if she could no longer maintain the sweet facade she used with everyone else. I held the phone slightly away from my ear, not out of fear, but disgust. Then Jordan grabbed the phone from her. He shouted, whether in desperation or anger, I couldn't tell. "Mom, you're destroying this family." The sentence was so absurd, I almost laughed. What family? I had been pushed out long ago. I brought the phone back to my mouth and spoke softly, like a breeze, but sharp enough to cut through their illusion. What family? I don't see it here. Silence fell on the other end, thick and sudden, as if they couldn't believe I had said it. I didn't repeat myself. I simply ended the call. The quiet that followed felt strangely liberating. But Alyssa's madness was only beginning. The next afternoon, I received an email from a law firm. I had to read it 3 times to be sure I wasn't seeing it wrong. Alyssa had hired attorneys to threaten a countersuit, accusing me of defamation, damaging her reputation, and harming the family image. I nearly laughed. A woman preparing to commit me to a public nursing home was lecturing me about family image. But I didn't underestimate it. I knew someone like Alyssa became more dangerous the closer she was pushed to the edge. I called Thea, my voice trembling with anger and exhaustion. "She's striking back," I said. Thea arrived that evening. When she placed her laptop on the table, her face carried an intensity I hadn't seen before. Her expression was so grave it made my pulse accelerate. "You need to brace yourself," Thea said softly, "because what I'm about to show you will shatter that little thread of hers instantly." I sat down, my heart pounding unevenly. Thea opened a video file, then an audio recording, then a document stamped with a bright red seal. The glow from the screen lit her face, making her look like someone preparing to detonate an explosive charge. I parted my lips to speak, but she lifted her gaze to me and whispered, "This is the most devastating evidence." And at that moment, Thea unleashed the most devastating evidence. Thea opened the last file in the folder with an unusual care, as if she knew this was the heaviest piece, the one capable of crushing any defense Alyssa might attempt. The screen's glow reflected across her face, while my heart pounded so violently it felt as though it wanted to escape my chest. When Thea dragged the email into the center of the screen, I leaned forward, unsure what I was about to face, only knowing it would hurt. "You need to read it with your own eyes," Thea said, turning the screen toward me. The very first line froze my blood. "When Helena is declared incapacitated, I will control everything. She will disappear." No politeness, no disguise, no hesitation. A declaration blunt and cold as ice dropped straight into my chest. I read it a second time, then a third, each word clinging to my skin. She will disappear. In my mind, the phrase pounded like a hammer, striking the final pillar of my life. I had known Alyssa wanted to remove me. I had known she was cruel, but reading these words felt like touching the frostbitten heart of the woman herself. What kind of person could speak about her own mother-in-law this way without a shred of humanity? I straightened, pressing my hand over my mouth to steady the trembling in my breath. I didn't cry. The shock was too great for tears to find their way out. I looked at Thea, trying to form a question, but my voice caught. She understood what I needed and scrolled to the sender information. The email was sent from Jordan's laptop. Thea said each word another blade. The room tilted. I clutched the edge of the table, feeling as if the floor beneath me was slipping. I tried to say my son's name, but my throat felt raw. After a moment, I managed. "Jordan, you also want your mother to disappear?" Thea placed a hand on my shoulder, but my fingers had already dug into the table, refusing any comfort. I didn't want a hand on me. I wanted answers. I wanted to hear it from Jordan. I wanted to know what could make the child I raised with every breath of love participate in erasing me. That night, I called Jordan. The phone rang a long time before he answered. His voice was small, trembling, exhausted, as if he hadn't slept for days. "Mom, why was that email sent from your laptop?" I asked. No hesitation, no warm-up. Silence filled the line. I heard Jordan swallow, then finally he whispered something that split my soul in half. Alyssa said it was the only way. I closed my eyes. In that instant, I felt as though I had come back to life and died again all at once. Jordan didn't deny it. He didn't object. He simply said Alyssa told him it was the only way, meaning he believed her, meaning he agreed. I leaned back in my chair, numbness spreading through my body. "Did you know they would put me in a nursing home?" I asked. "You knew, didn't you?" Jordan didn't answer. His silence spoke everything. "My family, they killed me with their own hands. Not with knives or guns, but with betrayal stretched over months, with forged signatures, with a criminal email, with a plan to send me to a place where people slowly fade into nothing." I opened my eyes, staring at the ceiling, feeling a hollow space inside me widen. Thea sat beside me, but she understood no comfort could enter this moment. Inside me was a cold and vast darkness where every hope for my family had been scraped clean. I rose, walked to the window, and looked out at the night settling over the city. I remembered Jordan as a child, his tiny hand gripping mine, the nights I stayed awake while he had fevers, the lunches I packed carefully for school. Those memories now drifted like ash. When Helena is declared incapacitated, she will disappear. The sentence returned colder than the night wind. I turned toward Thea. "What happens tomorrow?" She answered quietly, "Tomorrow the court gives its ruling." And her words fell like a bell marking the final stretch of a nightmare that had not yet reached its end. That morning, I walked into the courthouse with the feeling that I had just emerged from a storm that lasted months. My footsteps echoed on the cold stone floor, yet my heart no longer tightened the way it used to. I had endured enough, lost enough, and now it was time for the truth to be placed on the scales. Thea walked beside me, her eyes sharp but calm, like someone who had known the outcome all along. I sat in the victim's row, my palms warming because I was no longer the woman who feared her own life. The trial unfolded, witness after witness, document after document. The forged power of attorney, the video of Jordan standing next to Alyssa withdrawing my money, the email saying she will disappear, the petition to have my mental capacity evaluated, everything was exposed under the light of justice. Alyssa sat across the room, pale, still trying to hold on to her false confidence. Jordan never lifted his head once. And when the judge struck the gavel, the room fell silent enough for me to hear my own breathing. Alyssa was convicted of fraud, document forgery, and elder abuse. Her sentence included probation, financial penalties, and mandatory community service at a public nursing home. The irony stung sweetly. The very place she wanted to throw me into was the place she now had to scrub floors and serve meals. Jordan was declared an accomplice in the financial exploitation. He lost his job, lost custody of his children, and lost the reputation he once boasted about. As officers escorted Alyssa out of the courtroom, she jerked back and screamed at me with a rage she had never bothered to hide. "Helena, you destroyed my life!" I rose to my feet, looked straight into her eyes without hatred, only truth. "No, you did that yourself." She froze as if the sentence was the final blow that shattered whatever illusion she clung to. I turned away, not sparing her another glance. The trial ended, but I knew a part of my life had just been returned to me. In the days that followed, I gathered my belongings, not the belongings of someone defeated, but of someone about to live again. I rented a small apartment in a seaside town where the wind carried salt and the mornings were filled with sunlight. I set my suitcase on the floor, flung open the window, and let the wind rush in, bringing with it a lightness I had almost forgotten. For the first time in decades, I breathed like a free woman. No Alyssa hovering above me, no sighs from Jordan, no abyss they could push me into. I brewed my own coffee, walked along the shore, smiled at the days unfolding before me. No one controlled me, no one decided for me, no one stripped away my name. I reclaimed Helena Brooks, the woman I had lost somewhere between sacrifice and betrayal. One afternoon, while the sun melted over the water in a streak of red, I received a message from Thea. Just a few words, but enough to make me stand still for a long moment. "Helena, you won, and you deserve it." I set the phone down and looked at the sea. The waves were not loud, but deep and steady, like the breath of someone who had escaped a long fall. I placed my hand on my chest, feeling a calm, steady rhythm, the rhythm of a life that had been given back its right to exist. On the day the court delivered its verdict, I reclaimed justice. But today, I reclaimed myself. I smiled for the first time in years. My life was mine.